This is an ankle bone, about the size of a walnut, 50 million years old, from a dry hillside in Pakistan. It belonged to an animal that could run. Its descendants have no legs at all, and the shape of it settled an argument that had been running for 40 years. Everybody knows this story. The dinosaurs left and the mammals moved in. Empty rooms filled. But that is a story about a vacancy, and a vacancy on its own has never made anything larger. Remove every large animal from a landscape and the small ones do not grow. They just have fewer problems. So something else was going on. This is before us. The history of the world before anyone was here to see it. The date is 66 million years ago, and the largest surviving mammal on this planet weighs less than half a kilogram. And hold on to that ankle bone. We are going to come back to it, because what it settled is not what anybody expected. Now, before we go any further, one question. You already know what the last 160 million years were like for mammals. They were small, they were nocturnal, and they hid in the shadows of animals that would have eaten them, waiting for their chance. It is one of the few things about deep time that everybody knows and that nobody has ever had reason to doubt. Write it down before we go any further, because the next 90 seconds are going to start taking it apart. Put it in the comments now so you can see where you started. I will come back to it. Start before the impact, because the usual version of this story starts wrong. Stand in a Jurassic forest after dark and the ground is busier than anything above it. Small things moving in the litter, in the branches, in the shallow water at the margin. You would need a light to see any of it. And if you had one, you would not recognize a single animal in the beam, because none of them are small versions of anything alive now. They are all small. Nothing in the Mesozoic gets bigger than a badger. But small is not the same as simple. There is an animal with a flattened scaly tail and webbed feet that swims and catches fish. There is one with a membrane stretched between its limbs that glides between trees. There is one with short, powerful forelimbs built for tearing open insect nests. One that digs like a mole. Several that live entirely in the branches and never come down. These are not one animal drawn in different poses. They are separate lineages that arrived at those body plans independently, tens of millions of years before anything similar existed again. The picture of Mesozoic mammals as small nocturnal insect eaters cowering under a fern is not wrong exactly. It is one entry from a long list. Because there is one more animal on that list. It is called Repenomamus. It is about the size of a badger, which makes it one of the largest mammals of its entire era. And it lived 125 million years ago in what is now northeastern China, in the same lake deposits that preserved the feathered dinosaurs. One specimen was found with something still inside its abdominal cavity: bones. Specifically, the bones of a juvenile Psittacosaurus, a small plant-eating dinosaur. And in 2023, a second specimen came out of the same beds. A mammal and a dinosaur preserved together, tangled, buried by a volcanic mudflow. The authors of that paper argue the most likely reading is a predation attempt, interrupted, which is not a picture of anything cowering. So there it is, the first answer, and it is the one everybody has. Mammals spent 160 million years constrained, kept small, kept marginal, occasionally biting back but never in charge. And then the constraint was removed and they expanded into the space. But there is a problem with that, and it is not the part about the shadows. It is the word they. Because the mammals doing all of that, the swimmer, the glider, the digger, the badger-sized predator with a dinosaur in its stomach, belong to a group called the Eutriconodons. And the Eutriconodons do not survive the impact. Neither do a long list of other Mesozoic mammal lineages. The extinction that ended the non-avian dinosaurs took a great many mammals with it, so this is not a group that waited in the wings and then walked out on stage. It is a group that was hit hard, lost most of its interesting members, and was left holding the plainest survivors it had. The animals that came through were not the specialists. They were the small, the generalist, and the unremarkable, which in a catastrophe is the only useful thing to be. And it started from a long way down. At a site in Colorado, in the rock immediately above the boundary, the largest mammal anyone has found weighs less than half a kilogram. Less than a bag of sugar. That is the starting point for elephants and whales and horses and us. Which raises the question the rest of this episode is about. If what came through was the plainest version of a mammal, what made it get big? There is one site that lets us answer that, and it was overlooked for decades. Coral Bluffs is a set of low ridges east of Colorado Springs. Paleontologists walked over it for years looking for exposed bone and found almost nothing worth collecting, which is worth pausing on. The best record on Earth of the interval that produced us was sitting in plain sight beside a road in a well-studied country. In 2014, Tyler Lyson tried something different. Instead of looking for bone on the surface, he picked up one of the egg-shaped stone nodules that littered the site and broke it open. There was a mammal skull inside it, split down the middle, one half in each hand, looking back at him. Within about half an hour, the team had found 5 more, all from species new to science. What makes the site extraordinary is not only the fossils. It is that the sequence can be dated precisely and that it covers the first million years after the impact. Almost nowhere else on Earth records that interval at all. So here is what that million years looks like. At the boundary, the largest mammals weigh under half a kilogram. 100,000 years later, about 6 kilograms, roughly a large cat. 300,000 years, about 20 kilograms. There is an animal called Loxolophus at this level, about the size of a raccoon. And by now, the diversity of plants at the site has climbed back past where it stood before the extinction. 700,000 years, over 45 kilograms. That is a 100-fold increase in body size, from the survivors to the largest animals in the same landscape, in a period of time that is geologically almost nothing. So that is the second answer, and it is the intuitive one. The large herbivores were gone. The large predators were gone. There was space in the ecosystem, and mammals grew into it. And the rock does not support that either. Because if body size were tracking empty space, it would have moved as soon as the space appeared. The space appeared immediately. The impact removed the large animals in a geological instant. The mammals did not respond immediately. They responded in steps. And when Lyson and his colleagues matched the animal record against the plant record from the same rock, the steps line up. Mammal body size does not track the absence of dinosaurs. It tracks the recovery of the vegetation almost interval by interval. And the largest single jump, the one that takes the biggest animals past 45 kilograms, coincides with something very specific. At the 700,000 year level, the site preserves the oldest legumes known from North America. Fossil seed pods and leaflets dated to 65.35 million years. Beans. The legume family fixes nitrogen, which makes it unusually rich in protein, and it is still one of the most important food sources on this planet. They did not grow because there was room, they grew because there was protein, not a vacancy, a meal. And there is a detail that makes this much harder to argue with. After that burst, it stops. Mammals do not undergo another body size increase on anything like that scale for the next 30 million years. Whatever happened in that first million years was not a general trend, and it was not simply the world getting back to normal. It was a response to something specific. And when the something specific was finished, so was the response. So what happens next? What happens next is 56 million years ago, and it happens fast. Over a period of less than 1,000 years, an enormous quantity of carbon enters the atmosphere and the oceans. Nobody is entirely certain where it came from. Global average temperatures rise by somewhere between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius and stay elevated for around 175,000 years. It is called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, and it is the closest thing in the geological record to a rapid carbon release into a planet that already has a functioning biosphere. And in the narrow interval where it begins, something appears in the fossil record that paleontologists have been arguing about ever since. 3 groups of mammals show up simultaneously on 3 continents with no known ancestors. The first is the even-toed hoofed animals, deer, camels, pigs, cattle. The second is the odd-toed hoofed animals, horses, rhinoceroses, tapirs. The third is the primates, not the archaic primate-like animals of the preceding epoch, but the group containing every monkey, every ape, and eventually us. They appear together in a stratigraphic interval thin enough to represent a few thousand years, in North America and Europe and Asia at the same time. The best current explanation is that they originated in Asia and dispersed across high-latitude land bridges that were only warm enough to cross while the thermal maximum lasted. The direct ancestors have not been found. And they arrive small. The earliest horses at this level are about the size of a house cat. One well-sampled lineage, Cepharippus, loses roughly 30% of its body mass across the warming interval and regains it afterwards. It is not only horses. Several unrelated groups dwarf at the same time, and the pattern repeats in a second, smaller warming event about 3 million years later at roughly half the magnitude. The obvious explanation is temperature. The 2012 study that documented the horses tested temperature against aridity and against carbon dioxide, and found temperature the most likely driver. But there is a competing explanation, and it is worth naming as unresolved. Elevated carbon dioxide reduces the nutritional value of leaves. Plants grown in high carbon dioxide air are measurably less digestible, and they support slower growth in the animals that eat them. If that is what happened, then the mechanism behind the dwarfing is not heat, it is food quality, again. Which brings us back to that ankle bone. By the middle of the 20th century, there was a straightforward question in mammal paleontology that nobody could answer. Where do whales come from? Whales are mammals. They breathe air. They are warm-blooded. They nurse their young. At some point, their ancestors walked on land. But whales have no hind legs, almost nothing useful in the skeleton below the rib cage. And by the time they appear in the fossil record, they are already committed to the water. Paleontologists had a candidate. An extinct group of carnivorous mammals called mesonychids, whose teeth look strikingly like the teeth of early whales. Then molecular biologists sequenced genes and got a completely different answer. Their data put whales with the even-toed hoofed animals, with deer and pigs and cattle. For about 40 years the two fields disagreed, and neither could settle it, because the fossil whales that might have settled it were known mostly from skulls. And then somebody found the feet. In 2001, two separate teams published within weeks of each other. Hans de Wissen and colleagues described ankle bones from two early whales in 50-million-year-old rock in Pakistan. Animals called Pachycetus and Ichthyolestes, which had long, slender limbs and were built to run. Philip Gingerich and colleagues described partial skeletons of two others, Rhodocytus and Artiocytus, about 47 million years old, still amphibious, still with working limbs. All of them had the same ankle bone, and that bone has a very specific shape. In most mammals, the astragalus, the bone connecting the leg to the foot, has a single pulley-like surface at one end. In even-toed hoofed animals, and in no other mammals at all, living or extinct, it has a pulley at both ends, a double pulley. The early whales had it. The molecular biologists had been right for 40 years. So whales are hoofed animals, not descended from something adjacent to hoofed animals, inside the group, the same way birds are inside the dinosaurs. And the closest living relative of a whale is not a seal and not anything dolphin-shaped. On current molecular evidence, it is the hippopotamus, which means a hippopotamus is more closely related to a blue whale than it is to a pig. The exact position of hippos was still being debated in both of the 2001 papers, and that is the part of this I would hold most loosely. The ankle is not in doubt. So what is the pattern here? 3 times in this episode, the thing that mattered was not an empty space. At 700,000 years after the impact, it was a bean. At 56 million years, it was possibly the nutritional collapse of a leaf. And for the whales, it was an entire ocean of food that no mammal was using. Not an empty room, a full one that nothing had yet learned to eat in. The dinosaurs leaving did not make mammals large. It removed a constraint. What made them large every single time was something to eat. A vacancy is permission, food is the reason. And it ends somewhere that is genuinely difficult to hold in your head. The animal that walked into the water in Pakistan was roughly the size of a wolf. Its descendants include the blue whale, which is the largest animal that has ever existed on this planet, larger than any dinosaur anyone has ever found. That happened across the same 50 million years in which a cat-sized animal became a horse, and a small tree-dwelling primate became everything that primates are now. If you were in the water beside one, the tail alone would be wider than the entire animal that started it. And inside the flipper still, there are 5 fingers. All of it started from something that weighed less than a bag of sugar, in the dark, eating whatever it could find in the litter. That is the sentence I keep coming back to. The largest animal that has ever lived is a mammal, and it got there by walking back into the sea. And the evidence is still sitting in a walnut-sized bone from a hillside in Pakistan, from an animal that could run. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, slow, careful and honest about what we do not know, the like button genuinely helps this channel find people like you. And the answer you wrote down at the start: small, nocturnal, hiding, waiting. Small is right, nocturnal, mostly right, hiding sometimes. Waiting is the part that is wrong. There was nothing to wait for, and most of the ones that were there did not come through anyway. Which leaves one group I have deliberately not spent any time on. Among the 3 that appeared at 56 million years, one was small, lived in trees, ate fruit and had hands. For 50 million years, nothing much happens to them. And then, about 7 million years ago, in Africa, one lineage comes down out of the trees. That is where we go next.